You're listening to the Coach's Journey podcast, exposing the struggles and celebrating the successes in the life of coaches who are action takers and creating authentic impact in today's world. Whether you're just starting out, expanding your reach, or exploding your impact, you're in the right place right now. Stay tuned and be sure to subscribe to this podcast. Now, here are your hosts of the Coach's Journey podcast.
Take my word for it and let my actions define what I've become or not. And person B is like not budging because they're emotionally stuck in their perception in some other place in history.
Yeah.
And it becomes like, if you ever do a call like that, it becomes your job as a coach to help them move forward. And I'd like to think the call move forward today. But in most cases, coaches who are starting out, they'll be dealing with individuals who are stuck in their perceptions of themselves, other people, and they're emotionally attached to that process. And they can't let it go. And that's one piece of how that could happen. But your ability to navigate, and this is why we say, like, when we're sharing our own vulnerable experiences, is that your client zero, if you haven't tackled these things in your own life, and it doesn't mean you have to resolve everything because there's a journey, but if you haven't tackled them, you're not going through that growth process yourself, and then you haven't navigated that with other people. And in your mind, you're saying, I'm an incredible coach. And then you start working with somebody, you're like, oh shit, this is hard.
And I love what you said a few minutes ago. Basically, what it reminded me of is we never really know how emotionally intelligent we are. And the reason I say that is because once we have achieved a certain level, that is where our awareness is at. And so you might think like, oh, I'm great. Well, that's because that's where your awareness at. How can you be aware of what you're not aware of yet? And so, that's the fundamental question. So I think it's just this trust that no matter where we're at in this journey of learning how to be more emotionally aware and self-regulated and being able to connect with other people on an emotional level and being all of these things, that no matter where we're at, there is always another level of doing that. It's just we're not aware yet. Therefore, we think we might think we're there. And what you said, Faisal, then kind of leads us into our third skill set category, and that's around relationships. And to be really skilled at navigating relationships as a coach kind of requires that high level of emotional intelligence in ourselves and in being able to recognize where our clients are at. And I want to preface this because we had this conversation, Faisal and I, that understanding relationships and how they work well doesn't necessarily mean you're a relationship coach, doesn't even necessarily mean that you have two people that you are working with at the same time. Because even as an individual, I'm constantly acting and reacting to these relationships I'm in. It's just they're not physically present here in the moment. And so just kind of wanted to, so if you think you're like, I don't deal with relationships, this doesn't apply to you or me, you might still want to listen.
By the way, there are coaches who think that, and I think they're completely mistaken in this area where they're like, I'm a productivity coach. So if you're not tackling relationship challenges in their productivity, they're more than likely distracted because of the emotions generated by the reactions generated within the relationships.
And in fact, the most common reason I do a lot of coaching around productivity in real estate with investors and agents and brokers, the number one thing that people ultimately realize is their biggest productivity challenge is their relationship with themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a relationship. Yeah. So really everything boils down to a relationship, I think, at the most basic level.
And I would say number two to that is relationship with the people around them. Like, they're not effective because they can't communicate boundaries. They're not effective because they need to please people. They're not effective because they can't express what they really want out in the world. Like, they are connected to their emotional intelligence, but they're also connected to how they navigate their relationships, how they communicate, in learning how to communicate is a skill set in itself. Influence is a skill set in itself. So how do people do that? By the way, I wanted to mention, each of these we can do a whole episode, literally. So we're kind of covering like tip of the iceberg. So we do want to hear from you. Share your thoughts around this, and we might not even get to this 6 months, because if we go into relationships, I have a lot to say there. Maybe we'll cover part of it, and then maybe we'll expand on it afterwards. But there's a lot to be said in these areas, and then we want to hear from you. How have you navigated that in your coaching sessions? How have you shown up better as a coach, prepared to deal with these areas? And maybe we're mistaken. Maybe it doesn't need to be like this. Maybe there's a different approach to this. We want to hear that because we want to learn from you as well.
Awesome. When I think about relationship coaching, let me rephrase that. Coaching with someone with a relationship perspective. Just as an example, just a couple of days ago, I had a session with a gentleman. He's not married, he's divorced. And the reason we started coaching wasn't around relationships. However, he would like to be in a relationship. And so we had talked a little bit about his values and what is important in life and how can we work to increase his integrity in amping up the areas of his life that aren't entirely meeting his values. And then it transitioned into, and how do these values show up in a future mate or your past exes that didn't work? And it was really interesting. He was able to gain some significant insights into why those past relationships didn't sit right with him, and kind of affirmed how he could potentially look for the next next girlfriend,
The next guinea pig,
right? The next guinea pig, yes. And and at the end, it was interesting. He said something it took me by surprise, and he said something to the effect of, "Well, you really did an amazing job at coaching around relationships." And I thought to myself, like, why wouldn't I? Like, this is just part of the coaching journey, part of understanding how to work with somebody. But in this context, understanding relationships and how a person, even if you're working with an individual, what their concept of relationships are, and the boundaries and what they're wanting and not wanting. Like, these are pretty critical conversations that lead back to an emotional intelligence. How self-aware was he in his values? How self-aware was he, or aware of how that was then interacting with this other person, and his emotional reaction to them when they violated his values, but he didn't realize that's what happened. And so there's just so much fun material to uncover.
You're listening to the Coach's Journey podcast.